set them on fire. Shotgun Jew, meet him on the mountain. Shotgun Jew, meet him on the mountain. Shotgun Jew, drink from no fountain. Shotgun Jew, Papa. Shotgun Jew, fire, got it ready. Shotgun Jew, Papa. Shotgun Jew, fire, getting ready.
Victor Harris, a.k.a. Big Chief Victor Harris of the Mandingo Warriors, the spirit of Fire, has been masking for 57 years. Despite its name Mardi Gras Indian, the Indian tribes of New Orleans are strictly an African-American tradition, a.k.a. carnival, dating back to when the indigenous people would hide our people during slavery. Older generations, like my grandparents and great-grandparents, don't recognize Mardi Gras. The event, to them, is always referred to as carnival, dating back to when blacks were banned from the tradition of Mardi Gras. The tribes of New Orleans are in fact the oldest cultural organizations surviving from the original African tribes which were brought on into New Orleans. The tribes are particularly noted for preserving African dress art and musical heritage in the New World. The sewing and beadwork incorporated into Indian suits are all done by hand. Thriving in the trenches of New Orleans, Indian tribes pursue cultural traditions rooted in what is an historical past. Indian tribes are known for their fabulous costumes and hairdressing. It was the African drumming traditions of Indian tribes that combined with the brass marching bands traditions in New Orleans, which led to the development of brass bands. In 1970, several Indian tribes performed at the first annual New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, then held in Congo Square, what we now know today as Louis Armstrong Park. This will spark interest for Indian tribes to perform at major folk and musical festivals and musical clubs all over the United States. This story takes place on the crushing fields, the CP3 Calliope projects. Gerald Elwood, aka Nap, will be given the nickname Nap by his family. Born in New Orleans, Louisiana, Nap will be raised by his mom in the Calliope project. Like the old saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child. Nap and his older sister will grow up with many family members around them. The Calliope, which is comprised of the old side, new side, front of town, back of town, would mold and shape Nap as he was coming up. Known for being home of that dog food, people will flock in from all parts of the city to cop out the yo. That 11.5 will be different than any other vice. With Nap's customer base being the users of dog food, Nap would have to be just as aggressive, if not more aggressive, than they were. At the time, the length of time given to 11.5 pushers would be the same as if you had crushed someone. It is this that would shape the attitudes of the pushers. Nap would gain his hunger to hustle and his no-nonsense attitude, all coming up in the Calliope projects. At the age of 13, Nap would experience his first woman. Not long after that, he would grab his first tool. Being able to differentiate his emotions from intelligence will be another skill that Nap would learn coming up in the CP3. Courage, self-respect, and respect for others will be huge coming up in the yo. In Nap's teenage year, L. Broadneck will be the man in the yo. During the time, T's and B's, a synthetic form of dog food, will be the thing. It wouldn't be long before Sam Lee Clay, a.k.a. Sam Scully, will be released from Angola. Turbo will put Nap in the game with Scully. Being from the Jackson Avenue area across the street from the Calliope, Scully will earn his hood pass from Turbo. Turbo and Scully will be tighter than pliers. Turbo, whom was highly respected throughout the city, will be born and raised in the yo. Being wise behind his years, Turbo will put together what was known as the A-Team. Scully would have a plug. That plug would be L. Broadneck. With L as his plug, Scully will rise to dominance from the late 70s to the early 80s. In 1983, L will be found deleted in his 8-ward home. The deletion of L will create distinction between Turbo, Scully, and the A-Team. The A-Team, who would suspect that Scully was behind L being crushed, no longer wanted to rock with Scully. Turbo, who was friends with Scully, would initially stick around. Ultimately, the A-Team would make an agreement to steal cop from Scully, but do their own thing. Scully, who wasn't happy about this, would agree, but would then start to step on the product. Fed up with the games, Turbo and the A-Team would ban Scully from the yo. No longer having a team, Scully would be hit up in 1984, but would not be deleted. In 1986, Scully would be hit up again and still not be deleted. Sam Clay, aka Sam Scully, will ultimately end up being crushed in 1987. Let's fast forward to 1989. Knapp himself would be hit up. Knapp would survive being hit up and ultimately heal from his injuries. The year is 1991. As part of an ongoing investigation, St. John's Parish Sheriff's deputies will conduct a surveillance of a Holiday Inn in La Place, Louisiana, that was being utilized by Knapp, Will, Rudy, and Ernest. The men will be pulled over and caught with the work. A search of the hotel room will produce more incriminating evidence. Knapp will be sentenced to 121 consecutive month terms of imprisonment on counts 1 and 2, and consecutive 60-month terms on the weapon charge. In August of 1992, while in custody serving his 13-year bid, Knapp would again be indicted for his involvement with the Mets organization. Knapp would be found guilty and is now serving 3 consecutive life sentences concurrently, plus 30 years in the federal prison system. Construction of the B.W. Cooper housing project will begin in 1939 and be completed in 1941. Located in Central City, the Calliope will be comprised of 1,546 units on 56 acres of land, which is 24 city blocks. The original boundaries of the Calliope were South Dorjois, Erato, Calliope, which now goes by Earhart Boulevard. The boundaries of the Calliope would also encompass South Pier. In 1941, rent would range from $8.25 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment to $22 a month for a 3-bedroom apartment. The projects would be sturdy, made of bricks with iron grills and manicured lawns. Like all apartment complexes during the Calliope's early days, it was considered a means of working-class families to live comfortably while saving up cash to cop a new home. The Calliope would have 690 apartments in its original development. In 1949, a gymnasium will be added at Broad and Calliope Streets. In 1954, a 12-block expansion added 860 new units, creating the old side, new side. The expansion would stretch the western boundaries of the Calliope back 2 blocks from Erato Street to Melpomene Avenue, which now is known as Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. St. Monica's Catholic Church and School were considered anchors of the neighborhood, as well as local public schools like Booker T. Washington High School. Since the early 80s, rivals have operated in and around the Calliope. These rivalries would escalate in the late 80s, peaking into the early 90s. Percy Robert Miller Sr., born April 29, 1970, known by his stage name Master P, is a highly acclaimed rapper, record producer, record executive, actor, and entrepreneur. P is also the founder of No Limit Records, which he would later relaunch through Universal Records, Koch Records, and again, Gutter Music Entertainment, and currently goes by No Limit Forever Records. P and his brothers all hail from the B.W. Cooper Calliope projects. Lloyd Polite Jr., Henry Butler, Harry Sylvester, and Willie T. all would hail from the B.W. Cooper Calliope projects.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. For the New Jack City.
This story starts in 1987. Sam Clay, aka Sam Scully, has been deleted in the mean streets of the Calliope project. The predecessor to his reign would be Glenn Metz. It is rumored that Glenn's organization dominated several housing projects in the city of New Orleans, maintaining its grip by crushing anyone who stood in their way. It's the early 90s. The NOPD had cracked down on hustlers and steppers from every hood, making arrests of over 150 individuals. The DEA, along with the NOPD, would peg Glenn Metz as the main organizer and manager of a group of individuals known as the Metz organization that moved over 1,000 chickens throughout the New Orleans metropolitan area. Glenn Metz would be labeled by the NOPD as a known enforcer and kingpin from the mid-'80s to the early '90s. This stronghold will be held by the Metz organization during a time when New Orleans was the get it how you live capital of the world. Glenn, who would grow up poor and become a product of his environment, would already be known around the St. Thomas and Calliope projects for his street activity, supplying birds and allegedly having involvement in over 20 deletions. Gerald Elwood, aka Nap, was known for driving through the city in his custom armor-plated pickup truck. Rumors were circulating about the truck getting hit up and metal bouncing off. This would turn out not to be true, as Nap himself would confirm. As Glenn would get bigger, he would be known as one of the first major dudes with a crew to come out of the N.O. Glenn's wife, Danielle, came up in a middle-class two-parent household a few miles away from the St. Thomas projects, with parents that encouraged her to become a nurse. The realities of life in New Orleans would sink in, and Danielle would become a teenage single parent, losing her child's father at an early age and having to drop out of school. In July of 1991, as part of an ongoing investigation, St. John Parish Sheriff deputies would conduct surveillance at the Holiday Inn in LaPlace, Louisiana. Room 102 was among the rooms being targeted. Hotel employees would state that the occupants booked for only one night, paid cash, flashed large rolls of bills, and made lots of long-distance phone calls. A JPS deputy would observe Ernest Marrero go out to a Nissan Maxima parked near the room, remove a bag, and return to the room. Shortly thereafter, Ernest, Knapp, William, and Rudolph would leave the room. Ernest and Rudy, both juveniles at the time, would hop into the Maxima. Rudy, who would be driving, placed the bag in the back seat. Knapp and Will would hop into the armored pickup truck. Rudy would pull out with Knapp following. Both whips would allegedly run a stop sign and a red light. Deputies would pull Rudy over. It is alleged that deputies would legally search the whip and find the work. Deputies who would then search the truck would find a Glock. Further search would reveal a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson on the floor beneath the passenger seat. It is alleged that the deputies would also find a paper bag containing plastic bags with residue on them, which had fallen out on the passenger side of the truck. All four would be arrested. A search of the hotel room would recover a triple beam, more plastic bags, and over 5,000 racks. Ernest, Knapp, and Will would ultimately be charged in a 3-count indictment. 1 count charged Elwood and Will with conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute. Count 2 charged Knapp, Will, and Ernest with possession with intent to distribute. Count 3 charged all three with using and carrying firearms during and in relation to a trafficking offense. They would be all tried and convicted by jury on all charges. Knapp is currently serving 3 concurrent life sentences plus 30 for his role in the Metz organization. In 1993, Danielle Metz, aka Boo, who was the first-time nonviolent offender, was found guilty under a super kingpin statute as part of her husband's New Orleans organization and sentenced to triple life plus 20 years. Boo will be 26 years at the time and had 2 small children, Carl 7 and Glenisha 3. Danielle was sent to prison in Dublin, California. In 2016, at the age of 49, after serving 23 years, Danielle's triple life plus 23-year sentence was commuted by President Obama as a part of his clemency initiative to address unfair sentencing practices during the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Genre author, aka Meatball, 28 at the time, would be arrested as he came to work on a Tuesday night. Meatball would make his first court appearance that Wednesday as authorities initiated extradition proceedings to return him to Louisiana to face his charges. Meatball, who was being accused of being an enforcer for the Glenn Metz organization, which would be described by the DEA as the largest organization in New Orleans history. 10 people would be announced as co-conspirators in the original indictments. Genre author, aka Meatball, is now serving life for his role in the Metz organization. On December the 15th of 1993, Glenn Metz would be sentenced to life in prison after he was convicted by a jury of conspiracy to possess that white with intent to distribute that white, conducting a continual criminal enterprise, money laundering, possession with intent to distribute that white, and carrying and using a firearm in aid of racketeering. On August 14, 1995, Glenn Metz's conviction will be affirmed by the U.S. Fifth District Court of Appeals on all counts except for the conspiracy charge, which was vacated due to the conviction and life sentence he received for the criminal enterprise charge. New Orleans, Louisiana, the city that's identified by wards. One of those wards being the 3rd Ward, UPT, home of Cash Money Records and No Limit Records. Geographically, the 3rd Ward includes the territory known as the Central Business District, the CBD, from Canal Street at the Mississippi River to Julia Street and runs uptown into Tulane and Gravier neighborhoods, as well as Central City. In 1975, the Louisiana Superdome will be built. Later to be renamed the Mercedes Superdome in 2011 after an $85 million renovation. The dome would again be renamed to what we now know today as the Caesars Superdome. The New Orleans Arena would open in 1999. Unbeknownst to many, the New Orleans Brass, which was a hockey team, will play their last 3 seasons at the arena. The New Orleans Hornets, which we now know as the New Orleans Pelicans, would move in. In 2014, a renovation would take place. The stadium, once known as the New Orleans Arena, would now be the Smoothie King Center. One of the most notable wards of the NO, known for its iconic music, club, and bar scene, would be the 3rd Ward. This portion of the city would include several public housing developments made popular by local and international artists and entertainers. The world will learn about the Calliope and Magnolia projects from No Limit and Cash Money Records. The Dewdrop Inn and nightclub located at 2836 LaSalle Street in Central City would open 2 years before the completion of the Magnolia projects in 1939. The club was the only desegregated venue in the city after the owner decided to let whites enter his club. The owner, Frank, would be arrested for violating the Jim Crow era segregation laws at the time. Acts like Ray Charles, James Brown, Sam Cooke, and New Orleans native Alan Toussaint would perform at the club. Little Richard would even write a song called The Dewdrop Inn. Not far away from the Magnolia projects would be the Calliope projects. The Calliope will produce more than just musical artists with such greats as Harold Sylvester. A graduate of St. Augustine High School, Harold Sylvester will play on the famed 1965 color barrier breaking basketball team that integrated high school sports in Louisiana. Housed in the small building at 3901 Thalia Street in the corner of Thurston Ward, deep in the 3rd Ward, would be the Rose Tavern. Renamed the Rose Tavern shortly after the 1941 completion of the Calliope projects. The tavern, aka Rose Tavern, located directly across the street from the Calliope's central courtyard, will become the meeting place for the residents of the Yo, as well as the Calliope High Steppers. This story begins in uptown New Orleans, the Calliope projects to be exact. An alleged turf battle between rivals is in place. Decisions have been made, sides have been taken. Let's rewind. General Arthur, just like any other kid growing up in poverty-stricken environments, would long for the finer things in life. General, who would be small in stature, had decided that sports wasn't his thing. Charlie Smith, a former resident of the Calliope turned ATF agent, would claim that it was he, as a classmate of Gennaro, who would give him the name Meatball. Gennaro showing up to school with a bad haircut one day, Charlie would allegedly rib Gennaro, earning him the name Meatball. It wouldn't be long before Meatball would pick up his first grip. That grip would be a 9. ultimately earning him respect in the streets. It's alleged that Meatball's first acts would be going with the move on dice games, which would later turn into jacking hustlers and steppers. And just like an old wives' tale, folklore would have it that Meatball would coin the phrases, drop it like it's hot, you got it, I got to get it, and this is a 211. Don't make it a 187. When Meatball's name was spoken, it was almost like you would hear the sound effects from the Friday the 13th movie featuring Jason. Word on the streets was that Meatball would dress up like a woman and put in work. A family member of Meatball would claim this to be a myth that went with the legend. He would allege that Meatball dressed up as a woman one Halloween night and was spotted clutching the blicky, spawning the now forever etched in stone rumor. Speculation was spread about Meatball's involvement in the deletion of Sam Clay, aka Sam Scully, further adding fear to his name when spoken. The FBI has a high arrest and conviction rate, which is due most in part to flippers, snitchers, and ratters. It was alleged that Meatball once hit up an alleged CI, putting in work with a yappa. Meatball, who wasn't a big-time dealer, would be more of a hitter and jack artist to support his vice. That vice would be that white. It's rumored that Meatball had 70 crushings under his belt and would be the main hitter for the MITS organization. There are even stories about Meatball's involvement in the Earhart Expressway ambush. In the early 90s, an indictment will be brung down on the Mets organization. 10 people will be named as co-conspirators, Meatball being one of them. Contrary to popular belief, Meatball did not flee to Seattle after learning about the indictment. Looking to get away from it all, Meatball had relocated to Seattle 3 years prior. It would be rumored that an occurrence that took place in the Magnolia Projects is what prompted Meatball's change in direction. On Tuesday, October 27th of 1992, Meatball will be taken into custody by federal marshals. Chief Deputy U.S. Marshal Robert Chrisman was confirmed that Meatball, 28 at the time, was arrested without incident at the Seattle restaurant while he worked by 2 deputies posing as kitchen equipment repair workers. Meatball will appear before a federal magistrate the next day. He will be ordered to be held pending a detention hearing. Meatball will be extradited back to Louisiana to face his charges. General Arthur, aka Meatball, would be charged in a 52-count indictment under the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. The indictment would include allegations of 6 deletions, attempted crushings, distribution, assault, illegal weapons, and money laundering. In addition, Meatball was wanted on 2 separate warrants in New Orleans. Meatball, who is being accused of being an enforcer for the Glenn Mets organization, which will be described by the DEA as the largest organization in New Orleans history, is now serving a life sentence for his role in the Mets organization.